You bleed. You're full of filth. You're toxic. You're bad. You need to do something with yourself. Work on yourself. You stopped bleeding. Welcome to the world of normal people. Welcome to the world of purity. Doesn't it feel right to finally be clean? Doesn't it feel right to no longer need to shed all of those toxins that you accumulate in your womb? Doesn't it feel good? Fun observation. All founding fathers of veganism, of raw veganism, especially those who are super fixated on cleansing, on detoxes, on toxins, on feces, on guts, they're all men, founding fathers, and they keep recirculating this message of the inherent inferiority, of this inherent dirtiness of a female body that has been just literally exploited. This human body has been stigmatized in nearly all societies since prehistoric days, and vegan religion is no exception. Of course, how can you miss out on some vehicle to draw guilt and shame, to instill guilt and shame for something as basic as human biology in order to rule and manipulate, especially when it comes to such a vulnerable subset of human population as women, who are already born into the world that expects them to be ashamed of their nature. The more manipulated, the more vulnerable your target audience is, the better the cash flow. We all know this rule. And unfortunately, there are victims of this notion. On the female side, female influencers perpetuating the idea that losing your periods is something virtuous, is something great, is something to look forward to. And here I would like to introduce today's topic. We're going to talk about why veganism and raw veganism are inherently misogynistic, what makes them so, and besides the cycle, we will talk about something else towards the end. Also, I would like to discuss the female physiology. How did it happen that out of all species, only a handful of mammals experience period? And what is the role of period? What is the role of menstruation? Then we will also discuss, is it possible to ovulate without having a menstruation? Is it possible to menstruate without having an ovulation? We'll discuss those subjects and what's behind all of those mechanisms that absolutely can be associated with infertility and losing those miraculous benefits that female hormones provide to a healthy female body. So at first, let's make a distinction. Yes, it is possible to ovulate without having a period, meaning bleeding. Yes, it is possible to be on a period, to have menstruation without ovulating. With the second case, the underlying reasons for that can be an array of metabolic disorders, including insulin resistance, or there can be some internal problems, some polycystic ovarian syndrome, for example, or whatever disturbances in the function of ovaries as the main organs that produce estrogen in the fertile women. When we think about ovulation without menstruation, and this is what raw vegan gurus like to bring up, that you can have ovulation without bleeding, and this is what they call Immaculate Conception principle. Yes, it is possible to have an ovulation without menstruation. And there are several reasons behind this, but we also need to understand what periods, what menstruation really is. Because for men, for those like topless gurus who try to put together a sentence, menstruation is a mere bleeding. It's just blood coming out. So they feel like it's some mysterious detox happening. When in reality, it's not just bleeding. Women literally shed off some mucus lining that forms inside of their uterus. And this mucus lining plays an interesting role. It's actually pretty unique to form this mucus lining preemptively inside of the womb before the conception, before the fertilization happens. This mechanism occurs only in humans, several kinds of apes, and also in one type of rodent, spinal mouse. So this is a pretty unique feature that serves in effect as like natural selection mechanism. You can read more in detail in the article that I attached below. It discusses the possible implications why it was an evolutionary favorable thing to create this method, to create this adaptation. And in apes and in humans, pregnancy is a very resource costly thing. We have one baby per pregnancy normally in standard way, and it is a very long pregnancy producing a very large baby. So resource-wise, human pregnancy is a very costly thing. So with humans have a unique genetic profile, genetic makeup, which makes them more prone to genetic problems. So about 50% of pregnancies end up in the waste because body just rejects them. So in order for the body to ensure this natural selection mechanism, this uterine lining serves as a protective barrier, as a protective mechanism, allowing to eliminate uterine lining along with this implanted fertilized egg if the body senses that there is some genetic problem going on. So in effect, this uterine lining acts as an immune organ, as an organ, again, of like natural selection tool that allows a woman to select and keep only the most prolific embryos, such that the body doesn't waste a ton of resources supporting something that will not be evolutionary favorable. So this is in a nutshell, but in detail you can read more in the article below. It is the article about that discusses the spinal mouse in the context of periods, like what is the role of menstrual cycle, since it is a pretty rare feature in the animal kingdom. So this uterine lining, it has blood vessels coming into it. So imagine if you vigorously scratch your nose. I'm speaking for men. If you feel like running this experiment, you can really vigorously try scratching the mucus lining of your nose. You will likely bleed. And that even without having as powerful blood supply as our womb builds with this lining inside. So when woman is losing her intrauterine lining, it causes breakage of the blood vessels that supply this lining. When the blood vessels are being damaged, when the womb is contracting, expelling pieces of this intrauterine lining, this endometrium, those blood vessels get progressively broken down. Contractions occur to expel this thing. When blood vessels are being broken, and you can do this experiment in your kitchen, you can break your blood vessels via any mechanical means. What happens if you break the bottle with water? It will start leaking water. The blood vessel will start leaking blood. Okay, I hope this is clear. This is where bad blood originates in female womb when she's experiencing a menstruation. Then, how does the woman build this intrauterine lining? It is governed by the hormones. If you look at the diagram of female hormones throughout the cycle, after the periods begin on the down of the estrogen. After the periods begin, estrogen starts slowly creeping up. It increases. And then it reaches its peak, luteinizing hormone. They peak when ovulation happens, when the follicle matures and releases the egg. At this point, there is a signal that ovulation happened, estrogen drops, and then the second half of the cycle commences when there is a progesterone dominance. We got this, right? So all of those things govern the formation of the uterine lining and its maturation. And then if there are no hormones of implantation, when egg is being implanted in the uterine lining, it releases the hormones. If that is not signaled, if body doesn't receive the signal that fertilization and implantation happened, our body signals that, okay, the cycle ended, nothing happened. So at some point, at some level of progesterone, with very low estrogen, there is initiation of the menstruation. So this whole thing starts contracting and expelling from the female body, and the cycle repeats over. So what can happen if we have ovulation but no menstruation? So what happens? It means that the uterine lining didn't form. That's all. And what are the reasons for the uterine lining to not form? First is deficiency of estrogen. You are not producing enough estrogen. And this can happen due to a variety of reasons. It can happen due to some problems, pituitary gland. It can happen due to the thyroid problems, malnutrition. One aspect. Then, it can also happen due to stress because cortisol is antagonist of estrogen. So this also can happen, and sometimes yes, we see delayed periods during the times of acute stress. Acute stress can cause the delay in menstruation, can cause the delay in ovulation, just because again it competes for resources with estrogen. This can happen. Then another reason for why uterine lining may not be forming is due to uterine scarring. There can be certain pathologies, some inflammatory processes, or previous surgeries that prevent formation of functional uterine lining. This can also happen. Then, there can be too poor blood flow to your pelvic area, to your womb, and this can be a consequence of multiple diseases, including diabetes. And another interesting reason for why it may not be forming is literally due to protein deficiency. This is when your body starts consuming its own muscle tissue. This is when you can develop atrophy of the womb, because I can't stress it enough. If you have loss of muscle mass, if you struggle to build muscle mass, bear in mind that your womb is a muscle, your heart is a muscle. So if you start desorbing your muscles, this means that all organs that are muscles also will suffer. And again, I'm making next video, I promise next video will be on the nutrient deficiencies and what they do to each organ. But this can also lead to you not being able to form the normal uterine lining, because it can, lack of proteins, lack of nutrition, can start causing the womb atrophy. Its inability to contract, its inability to produce lining. And also, I'm urging to remind you that our mucous membranes are also formed of proteins, and this also will be in the next video. Which proteins, which amino acids do we need for that? So this is a summary of why you can have an ovulation, but at the same time not experience the menstruation. Is pregnancy possible in those circumstances? Potentially. It can be. There are several stories that state that a woman didn't have periods on raw vegan diet, but then she successfully got pregnant. There can be some blip that either she suddenly ovulated while being already pretty relaxed about her reproductive status and suddenly got pregnant on the first ovulation. That can happen. But then we also know what happens to the vegan placenta. And also in the next video, we will be discussing what happens, what nutritional needs are of pregnant women, and why veganism is not the best idea to sustain a pregnancy, and also the period of lactation. This can happen. Totally. There can be a blip in the system, whether you ovulated or not ovulated before, and then suddenly you got pregnant because there may be some blip and you finally caught accidentally some favorable conditions. So these stories can be absolutely possible. Then let's talk about what happens to other animals. Why other animals don't experience the menstrual bleeding. Why other animals don't experience the monthly or however cyclical bleeding. It happens because they actually desorb their uterine lining. Some animals are capable of even desorbing their fetuses. If the conditions are not favorable, then animals just consume, disintegrate the fetus inside of their body. Humans cannot do this, but we have a different mechanism for that. So now that we've demystified the mechanism, I wonder if you still would believe that loss of cycle, that loss of periods that, for example, Fuller or Christina freely are bragging about, are something of a virtue, something of a purity. And actually, I would be curious if either of them did ovulation tests throughout the month, because I would be really interested to know if they are ovulating but not producing enough uterine lining, or if they even don't ovulate. So this would be an interesting experiment to do, because lack of ovulation can also happen in response to stress, because our body, it's smart. It won't be producing offspring in the times of extreme famine. But there are women who nevertheless reproduce, being like visibly quite damaged from their diet. So I don't know. They have some super fertility, I guess. And now let's talk about the other facet, why vegan and raw vegan communities are being inherently misogynistic. So let's see, let's just recall some female vegan influencers. What do they usually do? At some point, they start over-exercising. Over-exercising, I noticed actually when I started having mobility issues on the raw vegan diet, I started feeling like I needed to exercise more. I wouldn't feel like working out, but I felt like I had to, because I had such a discomfort in my body that I felt like I need to do something. So I think that there is a huge component on that, in that realm, that happens to those ladies, that they feel like they have to exercise because they need to cope with the discomfort. They feel like they need to fortify their body. Another thing is that if a woman on this diet, through malnutrition, loses her cycle, loses her periods, which likely happens due to a multitude of reasons, among which, of course, inability to produce enough estrogen, she also loses all the protective benefits of estrogen. And estrogen is the hormone that protects women against cardiovascular disease and protects bones from desorption. There are other different aspects, different areas where estrogen is quite influential, but these are two main things. So with bone loss, it becomes very interesting, because all of those gurus will tell you that you need to work out. You work out without being, so you have mobility issues, you don't have estrogenic protective properties to keep your bones intact. You listen to those influencers and they tell you that to fortify your body, you need to work out more. You start working out like there's no tomorrow. You just literally work out all the time. And if we look, they all have some Pilates, yoga, strength training, some jumping, HIIT, long distance running, whatnot. It already puts stress on the body. And I mentioned earlier that cortisol is antagonist of estrogen. That's one thing. But then also, those gurus forget to mention that to work out effectively and to build anything, you need proper nutrition. But you're not having proper nutrition. So you're just living on this cortisol in the moment of working out, of those intense workouts, but you also don't let your body to recover properly. You don't let your body to recover time-wise. You don't give it some time to restore. Neither you provide your body building blocks. You don't provide body proper nutrition to recover. Because there are certain limiting factors on how much you can build on limited nutrition. So you live in this process of acute stress plus extended stress because your body is struggling to build itself. It causes an immense stress, and you literally wear off your adrenal glands. And let's think about the following thing. What happens after the menopause? A woman doesn't stop producing estrogen. She produces less estrogen. What is responsible for production of estrogen when ovaries no longer produce a lot of it? Adrenal glands, correct. And what else? Fat cells. Okay, so in a raw vegan woman, adrenal glands will leave the chat because of this regimen, of her trying to scramble to keep her body stacked and intact. Because she's losing muscle, she's losing bone, she doesn't have any estrogen. So she's living in a perpetual stress, physical and mental as well, because of all the brain damage. So she's living in that state. Her adrenals leave the chat. She doesn't have any fat cells. So there is no estrogen. So she loses all protection for later stages of life. So we end up with what? With an incredibly fragile, dry woman without any muscle tone in the pelvic floor, in the womb, with deteriorated brain, with deteriorated blood vessels. How is it womanly? How is it beautiful? How is it promoting of female health? How can any feminist stand for this? It is fundamentally broken. It is fundamentally crooked and upside down. I just don't get this. So please wash your brain from the propaganda. Get educated on the basics of human physiology and anatomy. With the scarcity of education and knowledge about female health, it is everybody's duty to read more and study and embrace and understand what really happens with human body, what really happens with female body, what makes it unique, and what functions it has, what unique functions it has. And stop listening to zealots who try to engrave some guilt about your inherent healthy biology. And here I would like to conclude my video. Please leave your comments, stories, and questions below. Thank you.